Good evening, chat. For some reason, I feel like I'm a little bit under the weather. I feel like it's just I can hear it in my voice, but I don't quite feel it in my body yet. But who knows? We'll see by tomorrow. Bit of a gloomier day today. Like I mentioned, the rest of this week is gonna look pretty ugly, but I'm gonna go play some tennis later. So why not get it going? Number 6. So Mick Quarry goes to see his boss, Joe Paterno, on a Saturday. An alarmed Paterno sits down with Tim Curley and Gary Schwartz the following day, Sunday. They immediately call the university's council and then brief the university president, Graham Spanner, on Monday. Then Curley and Schwartz call in Mike McQuarrie. You can only imagine what Curley and Schwartz are thinking as they listen to him. If this really was a rape, why didn't you break it up? If what you saw was so troubling, why didn't anyone, including your family friend who was a doctor, tell the police? And if so, Mike Quarry, were so upset about what you saw, why did you wait so long to tell us? Curley and Schultz then called the university's outside counselor, but McQuarrie hasn't given them much. They instinctively reach, as we all do, for the most innocent of explanations. Maybe Jerry was just being goofy Jerry. Here is the Penn State lawyer, Wendell Courtney, recounting his conversation with Gary Schwartz. Courtney asked at some point along the way whether this horseplay involving Jerry and a young boy, whether there was anything sexual in nature, and he indicated to me that there was not to his knowledge. My vision, at least when it was being described to me and talking with Mr. Schultz, was that it was, a young boy with the showers on, a lot of water in the shower area, group shower area, just kinda, running and sliding on the floor. Prosecution: are you sure he didn't say slapping around or anything sexual in nature at all? Courtney: I'm quite positive he never said to me slapping sounds or anything sexual in nature that was reported going on in the shower. Courtney said he thought about it and considered the worst case scenario. This was, after all, a man and a boy in the shower after hours, but then he thought of what he knew of Jerry Sandusky as someone that goofed around with second mile kids all the time in public, and he defaulted to that impression. Schultz and his colleague Tim Curley then go to see University President Spanner. Prosecution: you did tell Graham Spanner it was horseplay. Schultz: yes. When did you tell him that? Schultz: well, the first report that we got that was passed on to us in horsing around. Jerry Sandusky was seen in the shower horsing around with a kid, and I think the word was repeated to President Spanner that that he was horsing around. Spanner listened to Curley and Schultz and asked 2 questions. Are you sure that's what it was described to you as horsing around? They said yes. Then Spanner asked again, are you sure that's all that was said to you? They said yes. Spanner barely knew Sandusky. Penn State has thousands of employees. One of them, now retired, was spotted in a shower. I remember for a moment sort of figuratively scratching our heads and thinking about what's an appropriate way to follow up on horsing around. Spanner said later, I had never gotten a report like that before. If Harry Markopolos had been president of Penn State during the Sandusky case, of course he would never have defaulted like this to the most innocent of explanations, a man in a shower with a boy. The kind of person who saw through Madoff's the sight a decade before anyone else could have leaped at once to the most damning conclusion. How old was the kid? What were they doing there at night? Wasn't there a wild case with Sandusky a couple years ago? But Graham Spanner is not Harry Markopolos. He opted for the likeliest explanation that Sandusky was who he claimed to be. Does he regret not asking one more follow-up question, not quietly asking around? Of course he does, but defaulting to truth is not a crime. It is a fundamentally human tendency. Spanner behaved so differently from the mountain climber and Scott Carmichael and Nat Simmons and trainer Gonsar and virtually every one of the parents of the gymnast treated by Larry Nazar. Weren't those parents in the room when Nazar was abusing their own child? Hadn't their children said something wasn't right? Why did they send their child back to Nazar again and again? Yet in the Nazar case, no one has ever suggested that the parents of the gymnast belong in jail for failing to protect their offspring from a predator. We accept the fact that being a parent requires a fundamental level of trust in the community of people around your child. If every coach is assumed to be a pedophile, then no parent would let their child leave the house, and no sane person would ever volunteer to be a coach. We default to truth, even when the decision carries terrible risk, because we have no choice. Society cannot function otherwise, and in those rare instances where trust ends in betrayal, those victimized by default to truth deserve our sympathy, not our sincere. Number 7. Tim Curley and Gary Schwartz were charged first. Two of the most important officials at one of the most prestigious state universities in the United States were placed under arrest. Spander called his senior staff together for an emotional meeting. He considered Penn State to be a big family. There were his friends. When they told him the shower incident was probably just horseplay, he believed they were being honest. You're going to find that everyone is going to distance themselves from Gary and Tim, he said, but he would not. Every one of you here has worked with Tim and Gary for years, some of you for 35 or 40 years, because that's how long Tim and Gary respectively were at the university. You've worked with them every day of your life, and I have for the last 16 years. If any of you operate accordingly to how we have always agreed to operate at this university, honestly, openly, with integrity, always doing what's in the best interest of the university. If you were falsely accused of something, I would do the same thing for any of you in here. I want you to know that none of you should ever fear doing the right thing or being accused of wrongdoing when you knew you were doing the right thing, because this university would back them up. This is why people like Graham Spander, it's why he had such a brilliant career at Penn State. That's why you and I would want to work for him. We want Graham Spander as our president, not Harry Marco Polos. Armed to the teeth, waiting for a squad of government bureaucrats to burst through the front door. This is the first of the ideas to keep in mind when considering the death of Sandra Bland. We think we want our guardians to be alert in every suspicion. We blame them when they default to truth. When we try to send people like Graham Spander to jail, we send a message to all of those in positions of authority about the way we want them to make sense of strangers, without stopping to consider the consequences of sending that message. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. And that is the end of chapter 5. We're moving on to part 3, which is transparency. And chapter 6. It's unfortunate that, other people get into trouble because of what this book is talking about, default to truth, wanting to make sense and wanting to make the simplest of explanations to certain things by saying that Sandusky is always just horsing around, he's just playing around, he's just being a goofball like he always is, rather than assuming and taking for what it is that he was really with a boy, but naked in the shower. I mean, what else can you say about that? You know what I mean? So yeah, it's hard to say. Moral of the story is, do not be one of those people. Do not be an individual that is in the shower with boys horsing around in the first place. I think you should have some level of boundary within yourself and control to say, hey, I feel like even though we're just playing around or we might be known this for a long time, we still should have that boundary amongst each other that say, hey, at the very least, go shower over there in a different stall while I go shower over here. You know what I mean? Not showering together. But we all have our own ways of navigating life and our own, as Nazar was of our own kinks and desires and pleasures that should not be rewarded. But needless to say, there's people out there, don't be one of them. So yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. See ya.